and welcome to Care Smarts on Air, a home care podcast. I am Ruby Mehta, VP of Sales at Care Smarts. Today, we have a very special guest, Emily Isbell, the Chief Executive Officer of Emily Isbell and Company. Emily has a truly remarkable story, having worked her way from the bottom to the top of one of the leading franchisees, Home Instead. During her time at Home Instead, Emily demonstrated exceptional leadership skills, overseeing multiple franchisees and growing them by double digits year after year. She was a pioneer in the industry, becoming one of the most non-owner leaders to manage more than one franchisee simultaneously, all while ensuring that each business continued to flourish independently. Emily's secret to success was her ability to develop high-performing teams and implement scalable processes that maintained incredible service quality for clients. Now, Emily is bringing her expertise to Emily Isbell and Company, where she and her team are helping others grow their revenue and spend more time with their families. With over 15 years of experience in the industry, Emily's systematic approach to leadership and operations is truly transformative. Join us as we dive into Emily's inspiring journey and learn how she is revolutionizing the way businesses operate. Welcome to the podcast, Emily. How are you?
I am doing well, Ruby. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining in. Let's get straight to it, Emily. We have been following your journey, and it's quite impressive. So let's start with your experience at Home Instead. Share with our audience the key performance indicators that were critical to growing the Home Instead franchisee you oversaw to a combined 20.4 million in annual revenue.
So it's a long list, and it can be a little bit too much for a starting out home care owner. So I'm just going to highlight a few that I have found that have been light bulb moments for clients that I've worked with. And I like to think in hours versus revenue now. And so that was equated to about 1 million hours of care. And if you do want to convert that to revenue, it's around 35 million in today's economy. And so I do think KPIs are a key part of success and actually utilizing them well. And so just to highlight in on the ones that I want to share. The first one that I want to share is a lot of people tend to keep track of client losses. So the number of clients that were inactivated, deactivated, terminated, whatever your software chooses to call it, in the previous week, month, or during that previous year. That's very common. If people are tracking that, it's not common. It's very common to track that. However, I think a light bulb moment with a lot of my clients, and what we started doing is tracking the difference between controllable and non-controllable and having conversations around that. So your software may not be able to know why the client is no longer with you, but you can tell it what to know, and you can identify those clients accordingly. And being able to see how many controllable losses you had, and having a definition with you and your team on what constitutes controllable. I kind of say oftentimes the only non-controllable is if somebody passes, but that's a little bit of an off the cuff, a bit too much of a blanket statement. But there are times where a controllable loss occurs, and there's times where a non-controllable occurs that in another situation might be controllable. So for example, if a client moves to live with their daughter 3 states away, you could argue that it's non-controllable because they're no longer in your territory. But then you peel back the layers and it's, well, why did they decide to move to live with their daughter? What changed from the time that they started their journey with our home care company to now they want to live with their daughter? And depending on the evaluation of that, it may be controllable. It may be non-controllable. And so it arguably is a subjective measure, but it forces looking through a lens of more reflection and trying to see what you can do in your business to better keep clients longer term in home and with your services. Another quick example is caregivers paid is a good example that we started to track versus just paying attention to net gain, which is a common one that a lot of owners keep up with. But even some owners don't think to do that, and they only pay attention to the number of hired caregivers, and they're not paying attention to the loss. So the different layers of that is you start with number of hired caregivers in a particular period, and then you start paying attention to how many were lost and what's the net gain or loss between those numbers. And then you fast forward to the caregiver paid, which is really who's actually working, who's actually going to assignments and getting paid and serving your company. So that's a key KPI that we started to track and pay attention to closely. Another one that I think is often just ignored is a way to track online reviews, knowing how many online reviews are coming in from client satisfaction during a certain period, having a goal of a certain amount each month, not because you're twisting their arm, but your team understands the value of that online review. So when they call to say, thank you so much for what you did with my mom, I can't believe we wouldn't have been able to do this without you and the caregiver, Susie, that came, that your team member then quickly responds with gratitude that they're saying thank you, and then ask, hey, can I send you an email with a link to do that, to give a review, to shout out Susie on our Google reviews. And they actually are checking that off the box of a KPI within the organization. So those are just a few. I could go on for days about this, but I think for people to soak it in and actually apply it, I'm going to keep it to those three for right now.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think KPI is one thing, and then the way the KPIs can be achieved so organically, that's another way. So you touched on both actually, which is great. Then you're not just doing it because you have to check the box. You are doing it at the right time. You're collecting feedback at the right time, and you're collecting the right feedback.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's really interesting.
And I think I'll circle back and say, as when I say we had a lot of KPIs that we measured, that's not exactly like the solution. You can actually be to overwhelm your team, your staff with too many. So really, it's when I say we had a lot, we were built to that, and we made sure that every one we added was treated with the same level of respect as the previous ones. And so I think it's building blocks and making sure it's palpable for people to measure. And so start small, start somewhere, but start small if you're not doing any KPI tracking at this time.
Yeah. My next question is actually related to that. To measure KPIs, you have to have solid processes and tools and technology or some sort of way to organize everything. So what were some of the processes or systems or tools that you implemented to ensure growth and consistent service quality across multiple franchisees that you dealt with?
Yeah, so I think I like this question because there is, you know how people talk about like their overnight ahas. I actually have one of those. Like most people, when I used to hear that, I'd be like, that has never happened to me. It did happen to me, and I only recognize it in hindsight though. So all that to say that this process that I'm going to share with you was a big game changer on our ability to scale, and especially for me to spread myself between multiple organizations. Even though I wasn't working 40 hours in each, I was having the impact of 40 hours in each because of this process. And so two things I want to point out. One, having a culture of debriefing, that's not the aha. I'll get to the aha in a minute. But I do want to mention that, just having a culture of debriefing where the team is just used to evaluating the results and has a natural posture of attacking the problem and not the person. So if there's a challenge in the business, that everybody just knows, hey, we're going to hit this head on, and it's not personal. It's how can we do differently next time? In my own organization today, I sent the practice of that to 3 team members over something that happened. And so it's a culture here now, and it was a culture then. And that existed in place. That was not the aha moment, but having that is a key foundation to having good, solid results with KPIs in the first place. Because if you don't already have a reflective look at those results, then those numbers are just numbers on a spreadsheet or on a document somewhere. So that's one. But then the aha moment was in 2016, I almost called it quits. And I talk about this in my book, The 24/7 Solution. Um, I to keep this story short, I had shown an owner, a prospective owner, around the office and given a tour, and that was the plan. We were going to sell. And fast forward, I had an overnight moment of waking up and realizing the quote I use in my book is, "If I could fix it for them, I could fix it for me." And I'm going to keep from going down that rabbit hole just to make sure we stay on topic. But all that to say that I figured out many things that I needed to do in the business to make a difference in terms of processes so that I could actually have a normal work life. And so one of those was implementing end-of-day reports. And what this is it is what it sounds like. It's a report that you would send to your supervisor on the results you had that day. There is negative feedback sometimes that this may be seen like micromanaging. And I really think that's a barrier or a limiting belief that the leader or the owner might have about it. Or if there is team members that don't like it, then I have to wonder why they don't like it. Is it because they don't want to be seen? They don't want their lack of productivity exposed? Because other people, high achievers, are proud and excited to share their end-of-day report on all that they accomplished during a day. So having end-of-day reports was a key part. I talk a lot about subtle accountabilities. It's the idea that you don't actually have to directly say to someone, "Did you do X?" You create structures in place that hold them accountable, and it's subtle. It's not confrontational, and they report out. And so end of days really highlight that. And for overachievers, they get excited behind them. And so whenever in 2016 I about called it quits, fast forward that later that year, I had a complete 180, and actually we took over a second location. This was when I first started expanding beyond just one office. And I took over a second location and truly worked part-time in both offices. And I'm not going to say I never worked over 40 hours, but I definitely didn't exhaust myself. And a big part of that was end-of-day reports that were coming to me that answered most of the questions I had about the operations through the structure I had in those end-of-day reports.
Yeah. And it's amazing that how you said it. End of day reports could be taken as a negative approach of managing and being called a micromanager very easily. Mm-hmm. It's great that you get, but for leaders it's really important, and even for high achievers, I agree, they want to talk about their accomplishments.
Yep. Yep.
And they don't want to wait until the end of the week for your weekly reviews or whatever practices that people have. They want to talk about it right away. I did this today and I'm proud of it. So it's amazing. But yes, many people don't realize how important those accomplishments are, especially for someone who's achieving and doing great. They want to be heard.
Yeah, and I think something I tell my clients a lot that I taught my team whenever anybody was new to the team, I would explain the end-of-day reports this way. And when I was in college and high school, I worked in the restaurant industry. And so a lot of people have had that background. And so I would simply say, this is like rolling the silverware. You can't go home until you roll the silverware. In reality, it's a 15-minute exercise. It may not be joyful at times. You may just want to get home, but we're talking 10 or 15 minutes and it's invaluable, the results that come from it. But it's a closing of duties. It's a bookend to your day. So for the people that want to be proud, they're proud. For the people who want to just be like, I want to get home, well, you got to roll your silverware. We still need to know the results of your day.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. And when you took that second office, it's a lot of work, obviously, managing two offices and being a leader, stay on top of everything. How did you really ensure that your teams are flourishing independently and you can take on more responsibility? How did you ensure that everything was smooth?
Yeah, that's a good question. So To answer that last question, I said that I was able to, through those end of day reports, understand what happened in the operations. It was one-sided. I was able to see and not be out of the loop. But more importantly, and what transpired over time is that we shifted that end of day report to empower the individuals to follow that debriefing exercise I mentioned. So instead of just reporting what they did and their numbers and what they were proud of, or usually that is what people would highlight, we implemented a debriefing of their results. So where were they at in regards to being on track to their goals for the week? Were they on track? And forcing them in that structure of the end of day report to notice that they're behind. And so they actually had to answer the question, what is their plan to improve the results? So that invaluable piece that I was referencing to the end of day got even more invaluable, because now my team is not micromanaged, but managing themselves and reporting out on how they are going to hold themselves accountable to what they need to do to accomplish their goals without me ever having to say a word. And so it's exciting because you almost create these mini entrepreneurs of their own little business, and their business is their department, or business is their KPIs, and accomplishing them. And again, it's not micromanagement, because they're empowered to say, I recognize this, here's what I'm going to do. And you didn't say what they needed to do, which is what a lot of leaders, home care and otherwise, tend to do. They just go into problem solving. Entrepreneurs are problem solvers. And so they see a problem and they go to solve it, and they dictate. I do like to use that word on purpose. They dictate a solution. And people don't take well to dictatorship. And so as much as you, as the entrepreneur, the leader, think you're being helpful because you're like, I'm solving this problem, I'm helping you, they subconsciously or consciously feel dictated to, and you don't have a structure in place for them to feel empowered. And then stress, burnout, things happen. So really the debriefing exercise to recognize where they're at with regards to their goals and their actual results just truly empowered my team to be, like I said, mini entrepreneurs who wanted the best for their department, for their business within the overall organization. So the most innovative thing is creating little mini entrepreneurs from each of them.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Yes. We have seen all of that in our experience in different organizations. Leaders are problem solvers, but yeah, they do try to impose their solution on you. So there's a fine line.
And a couple things there. First of all, their solution may be the right solution that they want to impose. Okay, hold that there. Their solution may not be the best solution. And so what happens through these team members providing their plan is that you, at the end of the day, the buck still stops with you as the leader. And so maybe their plan is not pretty. Like, it's actually probably a really, maybe even a bad idea. You're reviewing these. It's not just to sit it and forget it and trust the process. You should be trusting, but verifying what they say and what they're going to do. And so when they have a bad idea come across, then that's when leadership steps into you. Leadership of that person steps in, and you say, I like X about this, but let's kind of smooth out the edges and try to do this. Or your experience comes into play and you say, we did that multiple times, and every time it's been a waste of finance resources, whatever the case is. And so you do bring yourself to the table as a leader. It's not a lot of people going rogue when I talk about mini entrepreneurs. It's not a bunch of too many cooks in the kitchen or arrogance, but it does embrace an empowerment for them to problem solve, to maybe, going back to that other point, have a better idea than you actually would as the leader, because you're not necessarily always right. And your team, if you do leadership well, you actually surround yourself with people that are smarter than you and bring more to the table about their specialty than you can. But the mixture of you both hopefully smooths out all the edges and makes it exceptional, whatever the plan is.
Yeah, no, that's beautifully said, actually. All right, in your role, since you managed more than one franchisee and there are always challenges, So we're going to talk about the challenges a little bit and also how you overcame those challenges, maintaining that high performance across the board.
So I think the biggest one that sticks out to me at first is when in certain locations that had surprise audits. There was a time where one of my locations, or even maybe two, was going through like 4 different audits, state contracting agencies that we partnered with, just franchisor audit all at once. So that can be a challenge when you have multiple locations and you have multiple teams, and that is a cook, many cooks in the kitchen. But I will say one of the things to combat that, specifically the surprise audits, because I think the hardest part was the surprise piece where I'm in one location and then I get a phone call and it says, oh, the state just showed up. Thankfully, I had prepared for that and had a team member, the person who's calling me to report that, understood briefly what to do and didn't make a mistake in that process. But over time, I learned to create a contingency plan of like having an SOP for the second in command of the organization to know how to greet the auditor, where to set them up, what to provide them, how the culture of it, to be friendly, to make sure that you didn't upset them and start off on the wrong foot. But that was a big challenge to have multiple locations and to have a surprise audit by the state. And we always did well I was never concerned about our results of the audit, but audits are subjective at the end of the day. Yes, there's a guide that they follow, but if they see a T, the idea of like cross your T's and dot your I's and there's not a dot there, but everything else is perfect. If you start off on the wrong foot, that I is a bigger deal than it might have been if you had actually presented well and prepared and together. So that was a challenge. You'll get me on a soapbox there on memory lane. But another thing that was challenging with the different markets is that there are actually true market differentials. And that was hard for me at first. I technically went both ways. One day I would think it was not true, and then the next day I'd swing complete opposite and think everything has to be different here, just because of the challenges that would come up and the natural human behavior of our emotions. But being able to filter out what is rinse and repeatable in certain locations and then what's not. And so the biggest challenge was figuring out rural markets compared to metro markets or compared to metro and rural markets, and how to recruit caregivers in those. It'd be very different, some of the tactics we needed for metro areas versus our rural areas. And not only that, not only recruitment, but how we paid, how we charged. So those things were nuances that were challenges of leading from afar and also leading multiple markets.
Yeah, no, those are the true challenges if you are not physically there, but you're still managing things as if you are there. I think the one big thing is having second in command, someone who can understand the value and really, in your absence, take care of things. That's really important.
Yep. And understand that
Yeah.
responsibility, not just a title.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about your current organization, the one that you started.
Yeah.
So tell our audience a little bit about your company and how you are helping others and based on your experience with Homestead.
Sure. So the shorter version of this is that in 2020, COVID woke me up to realize not that I was unhappy in my role and unhappy being in the home care industry, but that I always had a dream of being an entrepreneur and owning my own business, that I had worked with the owner, built these businesses with that owner, and so very grateful for the investment and belief in me that owner had. And but I'd always told him when we first started working together, which I started young. I was 19 when I started at Home Instead, and I think our conversation around this was around 20 or 21. And all that to say that when I started with him, he knew I wanted to be an owner one day of something. At that time, I thought a home instead, but I told him I would do this until I was 45. Well, COVID happened, like I mentioned, and it made me realize I might not make it to 45. The news reports we were seeing, I mean, we have to go, a lot of us block that out, but we go back to a time where you're seeing just horrible images of what COVID was doing across the world. And so while I was grateful we were considered essential and that we had jobs and other friends were losing jobs and being laid off, I was grateful for that. But I also was like, life is short. I don't know that I want to wait till, I may not make it till I'm 45. And so I took a sabbatical. I created a succession plan and worked with the owner to make sure I was replaced, and all of that went smoothly. I actually left the organization with the best performing month ever in my career for all the locations. And so I was really proud of that. But I took a sabbatical, wasn't sure what I wanted to do next. And in 2021, I started this business. And it was because I was recognizing the need. I knew what I needed when I was overseeing operations, and the support I needed that the franchisor just can't provide legally. Truly, there are barriers with that. But beyond that, I also wanted to make sure and create a performance group support system for people like me. So all that to say, we do two different things primarily in our business. And the first one I want to talk about is our co-leadership and any type of one-on-one consulting that I do with owners. I take an approach that I took with acquisitions. So my experience in the background, the way I was able to scale was we were acquiring existing homesteads and turning them around and improving the results in the different markets and growing them. And so I used that same approach that I used with acquisitions, but with owners, and this is their business. So it's a little different because when I would acquire, the owners were retiring or leaving the office. So I was able to just come in and do the changes necessary that I believed in. In this case, I'm working with owners who this is their baby, and I'm not here to call it ugly at all, but at times I'm here to point out where it might be sick and what we need to do to help make it feel better and work better, and to use that baby analogy. But ultimately, there are things that owners find sacred. Sorry about that. There are things that owners find sacred about what their business, what they do in their business, and I don't want to mess with that. But I do want to point out where we can make improvements. So through co-leadership and the different one-on-one services, we work to turn around their businesses while they're still the owner. And sometimes that is a hope of, it's always a hope of increased hours and revenue growth, all through quality services, quality caregiving treatment. But then also sometimes it's a matter of just changing where they spend their time, how they're working in the business versus on their business, and how to improve that and increase revenues and hours. The other thing that we do that I'm passionate about that I mentioned already is our powerhouse peers. And I often call it a performance group or a mastermind on steroids, because a lot of performance groups that are out there, there's many across many different industries. Vistage is a popular one that's just been around for a really long time. All of those are wonderful, but to me, they are a wonderful group matchmaking service. And so they create a group and they have some structure on how to evaluate your business with your peers and how to be vulnerable with one another in those settings. But that's not enough, in my opinion. And I think what we offer is the glue that brings it all together. And so we have facilitation where you work with a facilitator one-on-one between those meetings, that you're utilizing an action plan. You don't just sit and talk about what you need to do and then go back to the office and get back to reality and think, yeah, right, that's funny. I thought that I could do that, but I got to focus on the fact that there was a no-call, no-show today. So avoiding some of those environmental barriers that prevent you from actually moving forward in your business, we try to combat that through our facilitation, through the support of a team of 9 experts, including me. And what's pretty cool and what's been exciting about that is the results are showing. So we're a relatively young business starting in 2021, But out of that time, we've already seen that 88% of our members have had the highest grossing month, revenue month that they've ever had once they become a member. And so it's been a success. What I thought needed to be added and to make better has proven to be true. And it's pretty exciting to watch our owners appreciate this value that we bring.
Awesome. Congratulations, Emily. And I hope with this podcast, our audience got to learn from your experience and insights. So thank you so much for sharing that. And anybody who's listening in, if you need advice, reach out to Emily. She's already helping home care agency owners and operational staff. So reach out to her. Thank you so much, Emily, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.